Many thanks for being part of the show today. I'm Professor Ali Yusuf Zoaka is already standing by all the way from Uganda to join me. A very good day to you, Prof.
Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Very great. I would like to ask you, how is Uganda? How is Kampala?
Uganda is very fine, even though we had some flooding, in Kampala.
Okay.
But I think everything's okay.
All right, sir. So let's start. Prof, you are very close to DRC, yes. Not less than maybe 1,000 kilometers away from DRC. What is your assessment of the conflict between DRC government and the M23 rebels?
Well, my own understanding of the conflict, the way I've seen it, is that the M23, which is the rebel group that is fighting for certain perceived issues. I think the conflict has been on for quite some time, but because of the nature of the conflict itself, which if you want to take the historical antecedent of that conflict, to say it has some colonial legacy, and it is something that is actually hinged on natural resources, and what is aggravating the entire thing is weak governance that we have. Because you know that in 1965 when we to seize power in the Congo, they later named the country as Zaire and went to rule for 32 years. The regime was marked by weak governance and high levels of corruption. And we know eventually what happened when he was back in 1997. Armed groups strive amid local and regional struggles for influence as well as state failure to provide essential services and security largely to the population. So I look at, apart from the weak governance, we also have the issue of foreign intervention. And you know that Uganda and Rwanda are pointed as countries that are having some interest, and it is not surprising because they also have a part of their population that have spilled into the DRC, and so they naturally have some link with them. And of course the issue of injustice, which has been thriving in most parts of Africa. The issue of not addressing the problems of exclusion in governance, in the sharing of resources, and all those type of problems. So for me, I think these are some of the reasons why this conflict has been going on.
Thank you very much, Prof. But let's also look at it in a more simplified way for most of our viewers. Most of them have been heard about the conflict, but the January 27 march of M23 group into Goma and over the city of Goma is now a well-known across the world. But in your own observation, that January 27 issue, what really prompted and what really led to it? Because if I just like pointed out the historical antecedent of this issue, but there are some people who believe that not just the historical antecedent of the issue that brought it up, but recently there are some move by some individual, by some nation, by some group to ensure that these M23 people come out and take over DRC Congo. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to it is that what drives most of these conflicts are resource based actually, and in the area they've taken over, of course you know that they have quite a number of resources in those parts, and the control of those resources will give any group. So if they are being prompted by maybe outside forces to take over, it would be maybe to control those resources in the interest of those outside groups. And of course, so for me, beneath this entire crisis, the issue of who controls the resources. And we know, of course, that DRC has a very good number of these minerals that is required, by industries, in the West. And so therefore, I will not be, surprised if at the end of it all, that what is prompting this entire war is just the control of those resources. Even though you may have some other reasons why the M23 rebels have been supported maybe by some outside forces, it will be understood because if you take, for instance, the Tutsis and Hutu war that are taking place in Rwanda, you now find a very good number of the Tutsis in DRC, and they are not being integrated into the society because they are considered to be outsiders. So there is some level of exclusion. They don't get to register, for instance, for national ID card, or even to register, to participate in elections. So these issues, you can't live in a country and then you are considered a foreigner. It's just like what we have, I think, at the border between Nigeria and the Republic, around Emeko. You have this, this community that some of the property you live in, part of it is in Nigeria, part of it is in the Republic. So you cannot, and they speak the same language. So now how do you differentiate who is from which country? So that becomes, but they have been, originally living in that place, even though they have their offshoots from, Rwanda, but they are not being considered as part of citizens of that country. And then there's also an ethnic group that has its own affiliation with Uganda. And recently, even one of the generals was threatening that if any group should attack them, that they will go attack those. So you now see the way the external the country is now taking some external, dimensions. So for me, I think even though they may, be a problem that has some historical link to the country, but now because of the rich mineral resources that is deposited in that region or in that province, that is precipitating the crisis and bringing in external forces into that conflict, which is making it very impossible for UNESCO, which is the United Nations body that we set up to at least promote peace in that region, is having some difficulties because outside just the primary responsibility put to them to maintain some level of peace, they cannot attack the rebels. And that has led to this rebellion has led to the displacement of millions of people internally and externally. So that has been a very serious problem that I think the world needs to look into very carefully in order to restore peace to the region.
Exactly. About the humanitarian crisis that has erupted as a result of this particular crisis, but in your own judgment, what is the level of that humanitarian crisis? I've seen on different videos, either by CNN, Fox News, and BBC, showing some displaced people. But for someone like you, that is at least less than 1,000 kilometers to where the crisis is happening, how do you view the humanitarian crisis so far?
The humanitarian crisis is very huge, and more than 7 million people alleged to have been so far displaced, and some have become refugees, in neighboring countries like Burundi, where they have, because of the proximity, quite a number of them are there. For 700,000 refugees in the camp. And even the management of that number itself is a big challenge, in terms of resource constraint, because the world has not really prepared, for such a gargantuan, crisis that will lead to the displacement, apart from internal displacement of our 4 million people in the north and south of Kivu, which is also part of where they're having these, problems. You also have, these refugees that are spread all over the place. So, and these individuals, because mostly in the north of Kivu and the south of Kivu provinces, you have about 4 million people that are displaced. And then you have, out of these 4 million, you have 1.7 are children. And then, of course, you have approximately about 700,000 at Goma. So majority of refugees actually headed towards Burundi. You have one of the about 120,000 of such refugees. Apart from the other ones that will have also escaped into Rwanda, into Uganda, and several other parts, South Sudan. those countries that are neighbors, where you're having the conflict.
Exactly.
So it's really a very big humanitarian challenge, so to say.
I think we need to acknowledge that there is a huge humanitarian crisis coming up. But there are scholars like you also believe that if this is not carefully taken, this could turn out to be a regional crisis. Considering the accusing finger that have been pointed at Rwanda government, as well as Uganda, and let's also not forget the silence of Kenya and Burundi. Do you see the possibility of this becoming a regional crisis? As even though AU has a little bit been very quiet on this particular issue.
Yeah, you see, because of the ethnic configuration of the conflict itself, you have some Tutsis and you have some Hutus, all these old wounds that refuse to heal are part of what we're really experiencing in the conflict. And the tendency, and then of course, even the countries bordering this, most of the borders will have artificial borders. We have been talking about this where you have one ethnic group split into 2-3 countries. And that becomes a problem for because whether we want to look at it from that perspective, the tendency is that it will certainly escalate if it is not properly managed. Because already the Ugandan generals are threatening that if an ethnic group that is close to them, that speaks the same language as some languages here in Uganda, are attacked, they will also retaliate. That will automatically expand the conflict outside the DRC. So I think the world needs to really come into this conflict and find a way of resolving it as quickly as possible. I don't think they should allow this conflict to escalate. Take into consideration the level of development, particularly in these countries. They are not really ready for such if there is peace, at least if these countries will have the possibility of developing, because they will use their resources to grow their economy and their social system. But as it is, it's actually a very big threat to
now, thank
East
you.
African region.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Prof, for that insight that you have brought. So this will bring me to my next question. In terms of the socio-economic development of DRC right now, what is written about it is not palatable. Does it mean that nothing is working currently in DRC as a result of the conflict?
Well, you see, even the central, the northern, and other western regions also have their own, challenges. But because when you have this insecurity, it will disrupt economic activities. Particularly if you take the issue of trading, for instance, you can't go, from one place to another because of sometimes the roads are closed, and so that affects trade. And then, of course, if a country is not stable, you cannot even be talking about foreign direct investment, because those companies abroad that may want to come and invest in the economy, because of the instability in the economy and the polity, they are not likely going to come to invest. So it will strangulate the economy, which means that there won't be, because even these mineral deposits, they are not being legally mined. So you find that their prices in the international market are low, because they have there are a lot of certifications and some tariffs that are expected to be paid. Some of these, the gold, the coltan, and all those minerals that they have. But unfortunately, because of the war, a lot of illicit trade goes on in terms of smuggling this. So it's not directly contributing to the economy, because they are not getting, any form of tax, or even the sales is not going directly to the pockets of the government. Rather, it's going into the pockets of few individuals who are benefiting from the war, who want the war to continue. So you find that in terms of resource exploitation and loss of state revenue, it's something that you can say that the state is not really making much from the revenue that will have accrued to them if there was peace. Then the destruction of infrastructure. When you have a conflict like this, infrastructure will be destroyed. So you find that roads, bridges, health centers, hospitals, schools, and government offices are destroyed. And that doesn't allow for, so what you will now be spending to promote development, you have to now deploy a lot of your resources, maybe to even purchase arms, defend your country. Just similar to what is happening in Nigeria with the Boko Haram and all those militants. You see the spendings within the military very high. And that is affecting education, health services, even the road networks. So these conflicts have a direct impact on the society, economically, socially, politically, and whichever way you want to look at it.
Now, Prof, having established this fact that what is really happening in DRC right now, internationalize this issue, because the effect is not on a global supply chain or some precious material, talking about copper, talking about gold, talking about lithium. That crisis is now affecting it. Just yesterday, when I went through some of the price of commodity, even this morning when I go through the analysis of the commodity, it has been shown that the supply chain has been affected as a result of people are not being able to access that of DRC. Take for instance, cobalt. Cobalt is one of the best material resources that are being used for electronic equipment. But right now, because of the crisis, we can't get the one from DRC. And because of that, it's putting pressure, serious pressure on the price of some of these commodities as mentioned. So in your own understanding, or in your own view of this particular issue, what is the direct correlation between this conflict and supply chain that we are seeing right now? Because the traders are complaining that the DRC conflict is affecting the price of some of these commodities as we speak right now.
Yeah, one of the impacts will be that you now have to look for alternatives. Because if about 70% of global supply of cobalt comes from the DRC, now that simply means that the market, just 30% comes from elsewhere,
exactly.
Indonesia, Australia, maybe Canada, Russia, a few countries. So since DRC dominates the raw cobalt extraction, and China controls about 75% of global cobalt refining capacity. Now, they will always look for, it's not as if the cobalt will not still escape out of DRC, but it will not go as a legitimate trade, but illegitimate, because it's illicit, something that people have stolen through war, so they will sell it cheaply in the market, and that will affect, if the scarcity will not affect the price, of cobalt generally in terms of the international market, so it will affect it. But what that simply means is that other countries that have reserves of this cobalt now take advantage, of the market, and of course try to meet, if they can't meet, because since one country alone has 70%, and the rest of the world shares about 30%, it means that there will be some scarcity. This will certainly affect the prices of the electronics and all those things that are being made from cobalt. So I think that in itself is going to be a big problem. I know that Canada happens to be home to cobalt rich deposits, and you have them in Ontario and Quebec. But because of all this issue about climate change, pollution, and all those issues, most of these European countries also are watching because they don't want to actually go against some of these international laws. So basically, I think with the shortage coming from the supply, then suppliers have to look elsewhere, to get, to meet, the demands.
Exactly. Now, Prof, I mean, talk about supply. All right, sir. I mean, talk about supply have to look elsewhere for alternative. There are fears that China, for instance, dominate the mining sector in DRC, and they have a very long contract agreement with DRC government to exploit some of those resources. So there are fear on the international arena that right now that China will use that opportunity to dominate and also cause some supply chain, trouble on the international market. Do you share in that sentiment also?
Yeah, certainly, because the Chinese, they take the risk. The business is, you have to take risk. So if they are taking risks to go and invest so much in the DRC, signing also agreements and paying maybe even ahead of time for some of the minerals, then they will dominate, the mining of those minerals which will give them an edge. In terms of, that's why probably they have made some advance, in terms of advancement for the technological sector. China has made very great strides at it may be very difficult. So they know where they're getting there. They are not usually afraid to go to anywhere. They go to the most difficult parts. They don't usually just go during peacetime. They go anytime. You will find them everywhere. Even where there are conflicts, they will take the risk of providing certain services. They either road construction, railway construction, all those mining of, they don't, they take all the risks. I think maybe because of their number. I don't know, maybe because of their number, so they don't tend to, so they deploy a lot of their people outside, the Chinese territory. So they are there in all African countries. You see a lot of Chinese coming to Africa with just helmet. They just wear the helmet and carry a small bag behind them. That's all. But when they are returning back to China after spending some years, you see them going back with bags because they've made a lot of money. Which means there's a lot here in continental Africa which has been exploited by others, not by the Africans themselves. And I think the earlier we realize that we need to put our house in order, the better for us.
You're right. Very interesting from you, Prof, and the perspective you are giving is quietly shaping the discussion narrative. But let's take a look at very, very interesting aspect of this issue in DRC. Rwanda government President Paul Kagame has been accused outrightly that he is in support of M23 rebels, so that the resources in Goma can come through to Rwanda and enter into Europe and other parts of the world. Do you share in that sentiment also? Because there are a lot of reports right up about Paul Kagame, and in the crisis in DRC.
Yeah, I think Paul Kagame has actually had his hands, in support of these rebels, and it's not because of the benefits that they are likely going to get, for their country and for their citizens. So sometimes, find some of these presidents who should actually be promoting peace. And I think he would be interested in that because in the DRC you have these Tutsis that are considered to be marginalized, being oppressed and all that. So it's natural that they will support, their own citizens. They consider them, even the Congolese don't consider the Rwandese that are there, those Tutsis as Congolese. They look at them as Rwandans. They don't look at them as Congolese. They don't. So they have been excluded, completely excluded from the scheme of things in Congo, and so they are in the DRC. And so therefore you find that is what is now bringing in, even though some of these leaders have had their own interests, maybe because of the personal gains that they will make, in supporting such rebels. It will bring more money, it will bring money, it will bring resources to them. And of course, we know that most African leaders are interested in just lining their pockets. So it's not impossible that they will be supporting such activities, knowing that they will benefit directly or indirectly from the conflict.
Now,
so I strongly believe that because even the citizens of Rwanda, I have a few of them as students. I used to tell them that your government is involved. They say no, they are not involved. They try to disagree that they are not involved. But we know that their government is actually involved.
Now, talking about Paul Kagame being involved or being accused of being involved, I'll quickly point this out. There was accusation that automakers in Europe and Western countries are also feeling the heat because the lack of supply or enough supply of cobalt and cotton and other mineral resources affecting their production. So definitely it may be an impact on the prices of some of these products. That Nigeria, for instance, will import some of those electronics back home here. But the question I want to ask right now is that as we look forward for solutions, first and foremost, AU has been very, very quiet. Why do you think AU is quiet on this issue?
Well, for me, I think, I don't know, maybe they are overwhelmed by the conflicts that are going on around the continent. So therefore, the African Union largely not being supported by most of the countries in terms of the payments of most of the dues that are expected to pay. Most countries are not able to pay their annual dues. So how will the African Union operate? So it has a lot of operational challenges. Because if you don't have the funds, now you want to go and how do you resolve the conflict? Certainly you don't just go there and talk to people. You want to maybe get a force contributed by different countries. But you must support them. You must support those people with logistics. Where will we get the logistics? Even though we know that most of the peacekeeping forces are supposed to when you're going for peacekeeping, there are standards that you must meet in terms of what the personnel will use, the vehicles you are bringing, they must meet international standards. You can't bring anything that is not of high quality or standard. Okay? So, but how many countries, most African countries are facing one type of challenge or the other. So how do you now begin to, so the AU is weak, it cannot really, do much when it comes to looking to most of these problems in Africa. You have conflicts virtually everywhere. There are few countries that are really very peaceful and stable. And so they are facing a very big challenge, within the African Union itself. So therefore, I think that the African Union may not have the resources, have some resource constraints, and that's why it's not able to, move in when it is required to provide the necessary, means of resolving most of these conflicts. In my view, I think that is what is constraining them.
And Prof, interestingly, UN has been playing active role in bringing peace broker to this country or within the country. But how come there's not much positive result coming from UN intervention and some world powers also engaging in this crisis to ensure that it dies down?
Most African problems are left, and because the people fueling the conflicts are most of these big countries, most of these advanced developed countries, are the ones fueling it. They are the manufacturers of most of these guns and bombs and all that, and they need markets to sell these, their weapons. And once they have people that are unreasonable, so to say, that they are willing to kill themselves, then of course they have a market. So you don't expect them to be interested in solving a problem that they, in the first place, created, so that they can be getting cheap resources. Okay, so the essence of having the conflict is to have cheap resources, stolen resources. They are used to plundering. That's what they are used to. Most of these European countries are used to just plundering Africa. They've been doing that from colonial period to date. All they want to do is to plunder. They are not interested in buying these things at market prices because they don't have the funds. Where will they get the money from? What they get is from Africa. So how do they get all the funds? You generate a crisis. You now arm both groups. You arm the government. You arm the rebels. Then they keep fighting each other. At the end of the day, you are the one that is gaining. And then that is the only way also these illegal mining activities can go on, so that they can get, cheap, mineral resources, in the illegal market. Who are the people in the illegal market? They are the same people that are in this illicit trade of gold, of diamond, copper, coltan, all those minerals. They are the ones that are involved in it, because all the industries are in Europe, so they are the ones that need the raw materials. So that is basically why they are, ensuring that these conflicts don't end, and they keep fueling them. And that's also why there's no any serious, attempt and concern. You see the way they are concerned about Ukraine and Russia. So they don't have that energy for any African conflict. Africans are going to kill themselves. They are the ones arming them, and they have reasons for arming them to exploit the resources. So while they are busy fighting, they are busy stealing the minerals. And so it's not in their interest to resolve this crisis.
Prof, I really appreciate what you just said right now. But if you take a look at West African countries or the West African region, which we have ECOWAS, we also have a similar organization there in East Africa, which DRC, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda all belongs. How come there are some regional organizations like the EOCO have not come out to even speak? And we know that in West Africa, for instance, ECOWAS is very, very active. How come this other sub-region group, they are not that active on their own part?
Well, I think if you take ECOWAS, ECOWAS is largely Nigeria. Move Nigeria from ECOWAS, it will collapse. You have seen now the withdrawal of all those, the withdrawal of those three countries. Actually, it has affected ECOWAS itself because the ECOWAS miscalculated. When these three countries were trying to get themselves free from France, and the ECOWAS didn't understand that, they now say they are going to attack them. How do you go attack your brothers? Now you have in the East African region, the countries are not very strong. The countries are not, their economy is not as buoyant as such. Most of the economies are agrarian. Thank God they're able to feed themselves. Thank God they don't have large population that we have in South Africa. particularly Nigeria, that is the leader. So the leader here, for instance, in the South Africa region, tends to be Uganda, and Uganda is also not too buoyant, so to say, because if you look at the economy, and you want to compare, it's not as big and large that will accommodate most of these problems. You have problems in Sudan, you have it in the DRC, you now have, in some parts of Eritrea, Ethiopia. When you come in here, you see a lot of, Africans that have been displaced because of war in their country, in Kampala and several other, places. So already their hands are full in terms of trying to take care of these problems. If they are not being supported, they can't take the problem alone. Okay, and the countries are not too. Then you have the Kenya. They are busy with their own internal struggles. With the youth. They're giving the president all sorts of headache. So the countries are not very strong, so to say, so that they can now to concentrate their energy. Even though they have been making efforts, they have been holding meetings, they have been trying to see that they try to resolve the problem. But now that they are also being accused of participating, that's why the entire thing is being compounded, because the countries that will have solved this problem are being seen as the ones fueling it. You go to South Sudan, they also have their problems there. In South Sudan, we have a lot of people, all sorts of places, refugees all over the place. So it's a big problem, really, that requires maybe assistance from other African regional bodies can assist them, with the technical know-how and maybe personnel, so that they can be able to resolve this problem. Or it gets out of hand and then we have maybe a whole country collapsing again. We have been seeing in some parts of Africa where there's no, you have two governments running one state.
It's true. Prof, I need to appreciate you for coming on the show today. It's quite an insightful perspective that you have brought on the issue of the impact of the DRC Congo on global supply chain of commodity. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you for the opportunity and privilege.